Blind rage. Did you know that with the arrival of the holidays, the number of incidents increases? Crimes, assaults, robberies. During Christmas and New Year holidays, law enforcement officers register hundreds of crimes. What is this fact connected with? Firstly, the celebrations are accompanied by mass consumption of alcohol. People lose the measure of drinking and accordingly erase the established boundaries of behavior. Even those who have not committed atrocities before lose control. The list can also be supplemented by those who have mental deviations. When the spirit of unity, peace, and love permeates everything around, this category of society feels especially lonely and depressed. By committing criminal acts, sociopaths compensate for their moral state. In this way, they resolve accumulated internal and external conflicts. On January 25, 2022, the funeral of 26-year-old Elle Edwards was held at St. Nicholas Church in Wallasey, Merseyside, England. To see the beautiful young woman off on her final journey came several hundred people. The body of the young woman was delivered on a karate catafalque drawn by 4 white horses. Her unexpected and ridiculous death could not be accepted by the family's siblings, and the cold-blooded crime, which occurred in full view of everyone, did not leave the lips of concerned citizens for a long time. A man stopped in the parking lot near the pub Beacon, located in Wallasey. The local establishment had a special flavor and was full of visitors on Christmas Eve. For hours on end, the stranger kept his eyes on the entrance to the establishment. He felt that this was the most opportune moment for revenge. In the run-up to the festivities, the attention of many would be lessened. This meant that if he carried out his plan, he would be able to get away unnoticed. When at last the target appeared on the horizon, he fired. With a sense of satisfaction, the perpetrator started the car and fled the scene. On December 24, 2022, there was no sign of trouble. The city atmosphere was filled with magic. Everyone was preparing for the upcoming holiday. The streets were not crowded. In search of missing products, some residents were actively shopping in stores. Those who had not yet bought gifts strolled through shopping centers. However, most citizens were at home with their families. Christmas is a time of gatherings and cozy company. The Edwards family was also involved in the pre-holiday hustle and bustle. In addition, everyone was waiting for Lucy, one of the daughters of the family. To meet the upcoming holidays with her family, the girl flew in from Dubai. Her sister Ella was especially looking forward to Lucy's return. They were close in spirit and kept in touch despite the distance of thousands of miles. When the joyful moment of meeting occurred, the girls decided to cross paths with friends at the local pub, Beacon. There they had a great time. They danced and sang in karaoke, joked and laughed a lot. It was calm and peaceful as never before. However, the general merriment was broken by loud clapping. "Are those fireworks?" someone asked in the crowd. No, the atmosphere of celebration was disturbed by someone's madness. At 11:50 p.m., 12 gunshots rang out at the entrance to the pub. The bullets hit 5 people, 4 guys, and 1 girl. Ella Edwards suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Someone familiar with her attempted to give her artificial respiration, but the efforts were futile. Elle's condition was deteriorating. The injuries were too severe. After calling emergency services, ambulances arrived at the scene of the shooting. Having examined the victims, the medics made a preliminary conclusion. The 22-year-old suffered leg injuries, the 24-year-old guy was wounded in the arm, and the 33-year-old man's wrist was injured. The condition of 26-year-old Ella and the 28-year-old guy was deemed critical. On the way to the hospital, the unfortunate woman, without regaining consciousness, passed away. Ms. Edwards' injuries proved incompatible with life. Only a few hours before the crime, Elle had been talking to her father. "I was busy with Christmas preparations when the police reported what had happened," Tim Edwards later recalled. "It came as a real shock to our family. Everyone who knew Elle found it hard to believe what had happened. After all, she was so young and beautiful for her early demise. Did she really have ill wishers in her entourage who were capable of such a thing?"
Ella Edwards was a very beautiful and cheerful girl. She worked as a beautician in a local beauty parlor and also worked part-time as a dental assistant. Despite her young age, she was established in life and had a good income. She was very goal-oriented and had no plans to rest on her laurels. Ella was not deprived of male attention. Nature awarded her with outstanding external data. Her friends noted that in addition to external beauty, her inner beauty stood out. She was very kind and positive. The character of Ms. Edwards allowed to find a common language even with the most capricious customers. For what the employee was on good account with the management. Thanks to the love of beauty and makeup, the girl was waiting for a brilliant future. However, life ordered otherwise. At the first stages of the investigation, there were no clues. The intruder attacked us suddenly as he disappeared. At the scene of the crime, he left only shell casings and victims bleeding. Detectives knew one thing for sure. The attack was planned. Police needed time to determine if Ellie was the target of the attack or was a random victim. For the most part, law enforcement officials were leaning toward the idea that the girl was among the victims by accident. Detectives interviewed the victim's family to get a better understanding of the victim's personality and the specifics of her life. All spoke positively about the girl and frankly did not understand that someone could have attacked her intentionally. From their words, the deceased had no enemies. Ella was very beautiful. Perhaps there would even be those who envied her or wanted to be close to her. However, it is unlikely that the crime occurred on the basis of envy or jealousy. The Edwards family's words reinforced the police's speculation. The fact is that recently in the city has become not uncommon cases of strife between rival criminal groups. Sometimes, as a result of their use of firearms, innocent citizens suffered. Afterwards, the victims and witnesses of the incident were interviewed. It took a long time to check cell phone service. Officers also recovered CCTV footage from the pub. The investigation was to examine them. The authorities also contacted the media. They called on people with information to help bring those responsible to justice. Above all, this involved providing video footage from mobile devices that had been taken on the night of the incident. Any of them could show the car in which the attacker arrived. City officials held a meeting with local residents. First and foremost, they wanted to support and reassure concerned citizens. The next goal the meeting had was to convince eyewitnesses to share the data they had. It was possible that someone might have seen the moment of the attack or even known the perpetrator. A group of volunteer activists was organized who went door to door and talked to citizens. The result of the work was not long in coming. It was soon established that the attacker left the pub parking lot in a dark Mercedes A-Class. CCTV cameras also showed that having pulled up to the establishment, the offender waited for some time. Apparently, he was choosing the most convenient moment for the attack. When Elle and other young people were outside, he fired shots. After that, he quickly got into a car and drove away. It was possible to establish the moment of the crime and the fact that the attacker was alone. However, it was not possible to determine where the intruder went, so detectives went door to door interviewing the residents.
Hoping to identify the attacker, they described the vehicle and the circumstances of the incident. All city streets were patrolled around the clock. On December 25th, the funeral of the murdered girl was held. Despite it being Christmas Day, the site of the victim's last funeral was closed as a sign of grief and remembrance for the victims. The owner of the Beacon pub left a message on his social media page with words of support for the family of Elle Edwards. On the same day, her father laid flowers at the door of the establishment. "To my beautiful Elle, the light of my life, you will always be with us," he whispered. Already on December 26th, two suspects were detained. They were a 19-year-old Rockferry resident and a 30-year-old man from Tranmere. The woman was taken into custody on suspicion of conspiracy to commit a felony. 2 days later, another arrest was made against another Tranmere resident. The 31-year-old man was also suspected of conspiracy to commit a felony. At the time of his arrest, the two earlier arrestees remained at the station. The names of the detainees were not released due to lack of direct evidence. All three were soon released. The police failed to prove their involvement in the crime. The locals were angry at the rampant crime and the impotence of the police. Therefore, the detectives were forced to issue a statement again. They said that the investigation would continue until the culprit was identified and punished. It was still assumed that the shooting at the Beacon pub had been caused by a feud between local gangster clans, and the unfortunate Elle Edwards was seen as a random victim. On December 30th, law enforcement reported that the 3 male victims had been released from the hospital and the condition of the critically wounded 28-year-old had finally normalized. On January 3, 2023, police reported that about 150 pieces of data were obtained during the investigation. Among them was some very important information. It was found that the bullets fired by an unknown person could have been intended for Jake Duffy and Kieran Salkeld. The boys were part of a local gang. The group could not share a territory where illegal substances are traded with a rival clan. According to information obtained from closed sources, the two were seen scuffling on December 23rd. Apparently, the two did not take the fight that took place as a looming threat to their gang. Therefore, the next day the bandits went on vacation to Mayak. By their appearance there, they put the other visitors in the gunman's crosshairs. At the same time, thanks to video surveillance systems, managed to track the car on which the criminal left the scene of the crime. However, the intruder was ahead of the detectives. New Year's Eve turned out to be as turbulent as Christmas. The police station received a report of a fire near the Beacon pub. When officers arrived at the scene, they found a car matching the description of the wanted vehicle. Despite the fact that the vehicle burned out completely, the examination confirmed its identity. Apparently, the perpetrator knew that the police were on the trail, so he set the fire in order to destroy the evidence. It was also possible to establish that the car was stolen. On January 11th, the total number of people suspected in the murder of Elle Edwards rose to 5. Detectives said they had made an arrest of a 22-year-old man and a 23-year-old woman from Wirral. On January 13th, police announced the capture of the perpetrator of the shooting. He turned out to be Connor Chapman. Despite his young age, the boy was well known to police in the criminal world. He had a long record of robbery, hooliganism, threatening behavior, and aggravated carjacking. The latter offense was a real star attraction as he made headlines in many newspapers. He has been charged with several offenses in the current case. At the same time, the 23-year-old woman who was detained was released on bail. The investigation continued. It turned out that on the afternoon of December 24th, there was a scuffle between 2 rival groups. The cause was an area near a wooden church located in Beechwood. The altercation was very violent, but no compromise was reached. Somehow, Chapman became aware that several of his enemies were celebrating Christmas Eve at a local establishment. Instead of spending his first Christmas outside of prison in 4 years with his family, Connor opted for revenge. So Elle Edwards really was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And Chapman wasn't acting alone. Investigators managed to find out the name of another defendant in the case. It was 20-year-old Thomas Waring. The guy was taken into custody. He was charged with possession of firearms and assisting a criminal. During a search of Thomas's home was found significant evidence for the investigation. It was a videotape taken before the incident. It shows Connor picking up a gun and saying he was going to get even with someone. After the shooting, the perpetrators hid the stolen car. Later, in order to confuse the investigation, they ordered a cab under an assumed name. At around 5 a.m., the criminals returned to the place where they had hidden the Mercedes. In order not to waste time eliminating traces, they decided to get rid of the direct evidence in the case. As for Connor Chapman's identity, it was criminalized from a young age. He was born in Birkenhead, Liverpool. He was raised by his grandparents. The boy was abandoned by his parents at an early age. Since the teenager studied poorly, he dropped out of school shortly before his exams. In general, Connor has always been a problem child. Therefore, special hopes for the guy did not lay on neither teachers nor relatives. Chapman committed his first crime, shoplifting, at the age of 14. In 2016, he committed a carjacking. In 2017, another theft was joined by possession of a controlled substance. For the past 2 years, Chapman has been under police supervision and had restraining orders. However, he was more than willing to violate them. He was eventually deemed a danger to the community, so they restricted his access to several parts of the city. In 2018, he violated the ban again. Connor was in a restricted area. He also had a knife and illegal substances on him. That same year, the public heard about him for the first time. His sorry excuse for stealing a car became an anecdote among the local population. 18-year-old Connor had no intention of getting on the straight and narrow. Last time he stole an Audi. When a patrolman on the streets of the city noticed the stolen car, he ordered the driver to stop. Chapman, however, had no intention of obeying the officer's instructions. With all his might, he pressed the gas. He only provoked a chase. Along the way, the guy committed other offenses on the road. He ended up crashing into a curb. The car was thrown sideways and spun around. As a result, the carjacker was forced to leave the cabin. After not traveling a great distance, the runner was caught. The patrol caught up with Connor in the bushes. In his defense, he said he was expecting a buddy. His phrase later became a catchphrase. At trial, the defense fiercely argued for Chapman's freedom. The defense argued that the guy was under the influence of bad company, and also claimed that he was diagnosed with ADHD and a number of other mental disorders. This report was issued by a private specialist during the trial. The lawyer insisted that Connor was innocent and needed to be released. Thus, he was sentenced to 8 months in juvenile prison. Upon release, he was also brought a driving ban. This was a fairly minor punishment for a repeat offender who had 14 convictions for 30 criminal episodes. The young criminal clearly had no intention of stopping and spit on all societal rules. In January 2020, Connor went on trial again. This time, he was sentenced to 10 months in prison for being caught in a public place with pockets full of illegal substances. After serving his sentence, he was arrested again for 5 episodes of the offenses. At the same time, Chapman boasted of questionable accomplishments. He proudly claimed that he spent more time in prison than he did on the outside. Eventually, by the time he was 20 years old, he had received 19 convictions for 43 felonies. 6 months before the horrific incident at the Beacon pub, Connor was tried again. The lawyer insisted that the guy had realized everything and was finally ready to reform. Chapman himself confirmed the words of the stitch-up. As mitigating circumstances, the lawyer cited the impending birth of Connor's girlfriend. Pressing on pity, he said that the first child was born when the guy was behind bars. At the time of the last trial, the police were aware that Connor was in a gang and selling illegal substances. However, oddly enough, he was only tried for burglarizing a house and stealing a couple of electric motorcycles. Perhaps there was corruption involved in the case. At least the high-priced lawyer worked off the fees he was paid. Amazingly, everyone recognized that the guy was dangerous. At one time, law enforcement officials even made a statement on television telling the public to be wary of Connor. After committing a crime, he would serve his sentence and then be released again. It's a vicious criminal cycle. However, there was no good reason for Chapman's isolation. Most likely, it was due to the fact that no one was seriously hurt by his actions. The public was extremely indignant about the gaps in the law. It appeared that nothing could be done with hardened criminals until they maimed someone or killed them. On June 13, 2023, the trial of Connor Chapman began at Liverpool Crown Court. 12 members of the Edwards family took part. Prosecutor Nigel Power announced what the defendant was charged with. Chapman pleaded not guilty to all charges. The fact that the guy was caught on CCTV footage, he tried to deny. Connor this time said that on the night of the attack, he was at home wrapping presents. He was also evasive about the stolen car. At first, he denied stealing the Mercedes. Connor claimed that the car belonged to his gang. Later, he said that he had burned it because he had learned that one of his associates had committed a crime with the car. As sufficient evidence had been collected, his lie was obvious. The trial lasted 3.5 weeks. During this time, all the circumstances of the crime were established. The real reason for the shooting on December 24th in a local pub was rage and revenge, which Chapman could not control. In fact, he didn't care who got in the way at the time of the massacre of Jake Duffy and Kieran Salkeld, members of a rival gang. Prior to that, he had acquired a Scorpion submachine gun. The weapon could fire about 15 shots in less than 1 second. Connor jumped into the stolen car and drove to the Beacon. Before firing the shot, he kept surveillance for 3 hours. In the meantime, the security camera captured Elle happily socializing with friends. She even left briefly to go into another pub before taking her sister Lucy home and returning again. At 11:47 p.m., the girl showed up outside again to have a smoke. To her misfortune, she found herself next to Chapman's targets. At this time, Connor was just in the parking lot. His long brown hair was visible on camera, as well as his face covered by a hood or balaclava. A short time later, as he heeled toward his car for further escape, he fired 12 shots. The resulting wound rendered Ella unconscious and fell on top of Salkeld. Thus, Elle Edwards received bullets that were not meant for her. After the attack, Connor was going to flee to Spain, but literally at the airport was detained by law enforcement officers. To cover their tracks, Chapman and Waring set fire to the car and got rid of the weapon, which, by the way, was never found. However, traces of Connor's DNA were found on one of the shell casings, which indicates that the defendant loaded the gun before firing it. During the search of his home, red gloves were found which were clearly visible on the pub's CCTV footage. They were also found to have his DNA on them. All of these facts linked Chapman to the massacre that took place. By the way, while the perpetrator was awaiting sentencing, both of his attack targets were behind bars. Before the jury of 5 men and 7 women went to discuss the verdict, Tim Edwards was given the opportunity to speak. He said he had been forced to view CCTV footage before the trial. "It's horrible to see your daughter die and not be able to prevent it. I will never forget it. Ellie was in the street with her back turned to her perpetrator," the father reported. He added that if the shots had come 6 inches up or to the side, his Elle would still be alive. Ella's father hoped the final verdict would be fair and the perpetrator would never again be able to spend Christmas with his family on the loose. It took the judges 3 hours to come to a unanimous decision. On July 7, 2023, Connor Chapman was sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 48 years. The Edwards family was happy that the cold-blooded criminal would be behind bars for the rest of his life. The convict cynically committed the crime and did not even think to repent of it. It was proved at the trial that the pub shooting was the culmination of a feud between the Woodchurch and Beechwood Estate gangs on both sides of the M53. Thomas Waring was also found guilty of all charges against him. He was sentenced to 9 years in prison by the court the same month. Such a short sentence was probably due to the fact that the lad, unlike Chapman, had little criminal experience. The public was outraged. Innocent citizens were once again caught up in criminal disputes. They were even angrier that potentially dangerous gang members often served minimal sentences. Prohibitions, which are used by the courts as additional penalties, have little effect. This became particularly evident in the case of Connor Chapman. The lad was subject to a ban on being on the premises where the pub was located, as well as a ban on driving. To ensure the safety of the public, they proved ineffective. The death of Elle Edwards was proof of that. The incident highlighted the need for a review of the existing legal framework. In addition, the brazen attack once again highlighted the problem of firearms availability. After several similar deaths in the county of Merseyside, the government has allocated $350,000 to implement a pilot program. It is linked to reducing gun crime across the region. Tim Edwards also announced the organization of a fund to support victims of gun violence. One of the main goals of the national authorities should be to reduce the number of guns in the hands of civilians and criminal gangs. Father L. expressed his views. He also added that carrying weapons, even for children, is becoming the norm. The younger generation is particularly vulnerable to what they see and hear. Mr. Edwards recalled that during his childhood years, he never heard of any of the kids picking up a gun, much less knowing where to get one. In his words, everyone has become very vulnerable in today's society. People are not safe anywhere. An attack can happen in a private home, on the street, or in a crowded place. A prime example of this was the party at the Beacon Pub on Christmas Eve 2022. A celebration that should have been full of joy and warmth for Elle Edwards turned into an irreparable tragedy. After Victor Alexander Puterol committed the heinous crime, he carelessly went to the home of his girlfriend's father, Raina, ostensibly to retrieve forgotten children's clothes. There he took a tablet belonging to one of the victimized girls and pawned it at a nearby pawn shop, receiving about 500 pesos. The next day, he spent the equivalent of US $10 while vacationing on the beach with his best friend, Crystal. During the outing, he confessed that he had done something bad to his lover, but without any specific details. Crystal later said that by Victor's tone, words, and expressions, she guessed the seriousness of what had happened. She even allegedly tried to visit the house, intending to see if Raina and her children were all right. However, Victor refused the visit, citing the disorder and difficult emotional atmosphere in the family. That was enough for the girl to decide that she had done the best she could in the situation. Crystal did not go to the police. Concerned neighbors contacted the police later when the smell of decomposition emanating from Raina and Victor's home became so strong that it could no longer be ignored or explained by rotting garbage or dead animals on the property. The pungent, nauseating odor was undoubtedly coming from the recently moved couple's home, where flies were congregating at the windows. Since Raina and Victor had only recently moved into the house and had not yet made friends with the neighbors, no one had their phone numbers or any other means of contacting the couple. Moreover, no one had seen Raina, Victor, or the children for several days. Due to the inability to contact the homeowners and the frightening smell, concerned neighbors called emergency services. A few hours after the call, law enforcement officers picked the door lock and entered the home. Inside, they were greeted by a truly horrifying sight: the 4 lifeless bodies of Raina and her children. Raina's daughters were found in a room next to their mother, and the son was found hanging from a rung in a closet. It's unclear how the press was immediately on the scene, but no sooner had the detectives established the identity of the man who lived with Raina and fined him, as a report with shocking details of the death of the family went live on one of the major metropolitan TV channels. So Victor Alexander Puterol, while at work in his workshop, learned that the police had broken into his house and found the bodies of 4 victims. Realizing that he would soon be detained, he sent a message to the owner of the workshop. "I cut short the life of the love of my life. She loved me with all her soul, and I loved her too, a perfect love with no arguments. It's a very sad story." In messages to Miguel Uranga Marancini, he passed on the contacts of Raina's relatives, asking them to pass them on to the police. He explained that he only trusted Miguel, deeply regretted what had happened, and asked him to convey to the biker club his last wish. He would like to leave as a biker, with a large motorcycle escort at the funeral. The last message, after which Victor stopped replying to Miguel, read, "Now I don't believe anyone. Everyone wants to save me, but it's not going to happen. I'm leaving this damned world. I don't care what happens. I'm leaving. See you later." Miguel Uranga contacted the police, told them everything, and added that his friend had reportedly taken his own life. Law enforcement officers tracked the location of Victor's cell phone and went to the scene. Victor Alexander Puterol did not do anything to himself. Moreover, he didn't even think about it. He didn't even feel remorse or guilt for what had happened. The man knew he would be caught, and in a sense planned his arrest to make it as safe for himself as possible. Gathering his backpack of essentials, he headed to a small park not far from the workshop. For a while, he sat pensively on the sidewalk next to the park. A passerby approached him and asked if he needed help. Shaking his head from side to side, he replied that he was fine, stood up, walked into the park, and lay down on the grass. In this position, looking serenely at the sky and putting his hands behind his head, Victor lay there for almost an hour. Around 8 a.m., a national police van arrived. The man did not move or resist arrest. The arrest took less than 5 minutes. Reina Isabel Encarnacion was born in 1985 in the Dominican Republic.
A few years after Reina was born, her parents decided to separate. Her father left the family, but continued to support his ex-wife and daughter. Later, Reina's mother met another man, and the girl had a stepfather, who essentially became another father to her. Reina developed a great bond with her mother's new husband and maintained a warm relationship with her biological father. Both men treated her with warmth and care. Reina grew up to be an inquisitive and active child. She loved learning and enjoyed going to school. Her father's house was nearby, and she often saw him. It seemed that this intelligent and cheerful girl had a great future ahead of her. After successfully completing school, Reina entered university and began her higher education in commercial law. At the same time, she applied to the Autonomous University of Santo Domingo with the dream of obtaining a second degree in medicine. But she was not accepted and had to postpone her dream until the following year. When Reina turned 20, she met a man much older than herself, Daniel Bowden. Despite the significant age difference, a romantic spark ignited between them. A few months into their relationship, Reina became pregnant and the couple married. As a result of this union, they had 3 children, Daniela, Aracmina, and Angela. Reina had to give up her dream of getting a second higher education. At first, Reina and Daniel's marriage seemed ideal, but over time, the age difference began to affect their relationship, leading to frequent quarrels. Daniel realized that the constant conflicts are harmful to their children, and after 8 years of life together, the couple decided to separate. A long legal battle ensued, primarily concerning child custody. Unable to reach an agreement on their own, family court specialists intervened. They decided to conduct a psychological evaluation to help the children formulate who they wanted to live with. The experts concluded that the father should be the guardian, taking into account his age, financial situation, and the opinion of the older children. However, the judge making the final decision ignored the experts' recommendations and awarded custody of the older children to Reina. The youngest daughter, Angela, was to be raised in the custody of one of Daniel's sisters. Tragically, this decision deprived the children of not only a future, but a life. The years that followed showed that the judge should have heeded the advice of experts. It turned out that Reina's struggle was more about alimony than the children. After gaining custody of the older children, she immediately handed them over to her mother, believing it to be the best solution for everyone. She then initiated a new legal dispute over alimony payments. Reina claimed that her ex-husband had not paid her any of the court-ordered amount. Daniel countered that he had fulfilled all obligations, although he couldn't provide proof, claiming the payments were made in cash. The legal battle lasted several months and concluded in the mother's favor, with Daniel making another alimony payment. Significantly, during the second legal proceeding, Reina's own mother testified in defense of her former son-in-law, Daniel. She believed that Daniel was an excellent and responsible father who deserved better treatment. She emphasized that he and her daughter had shared 8 beautiful years together, with Daniel being a good, responsible husband and father. It's not to say that Reina neglected her children entirely. She visited them almost daily at their grandmother's place and regularly took them to her home on weekends. The rest of the time, she lived life to the fullest, making up for lost youth. At one of the parties, she met her new love, Victor Alexander Puturale. It's hard to imagine what attracted the young woman to Victor. He was 2 years younger than Reina. On one hand, Victor made a striking first impression. A mystically minded young man with long black hair and glowing white contact lenses, a biker and metalhead. On the other hand, he was a dirty, unkempt, introverted, and insecure guy. These peculiarities didn't deter the girl. Soon, the love-struck couple moved in together. Reina's mother accepted Victor. The young man won her over with his affability and numerous tales of the difficult life situations he had endured. He often and in detail spoke about his challenging childhood when his mother left him under the care of a strict and harsh father.
Unfortunately, manipulating the maternal instinct did not alert the children's grandmother. On the contrary, it endeared her to the manipulator. Victor was born in 1987. He indeed spent his early years with his father. It is unknown whether he was cruel to him. Victor learned to adapt to circumstances, even if they were uncomfortable for him, and no one in his surroundings saw anything odd about him, except for his appearance. From childhood, Victor never got into conflicts. He excelled in school and graduated with honors. He couldn't attend university only because his parents couldn't afford it. Therefore, he started looking for work and soon got an internship in a motorcycle repair shop. Since then, motorcycles became his passion. Over time, Victor acquired a Harley-Davidson motorcycle and joined the subculture of motorcycle enthusiasts and fans. A quiet, law-abiding citizen with no history of even a parking ticket, Victor nevertheless scared those around him, always in black clothes, with eye makeup, painted nails, and often white contact lenses. Very rarely did his control slip, revealing the lurking monster. After the incident, a neighbor recalled how he accidentally saw Victor Puterillo when he caught a neighbor's chicken, slit its throat, and drank the hot blood directly from the bird's wound. Raina and Victor took the children on weekends and sometimes on weekdays. The grandparents were very happy to have a break from their 3 noisy and active grandchildren. They saw that their daughter's new partner was kind and attentive to the children. Raina never complained to her parents about Victor, and in general, they never seemed to quarrel, which pleased her parents very much. The only shadow over this idyllic scene was a disturbing piece of information they had accidentally learned. Victor had a 10-year-old daughter whose biological mother had obtained a restraining order forbidding Victor from approaching the girl. Raina's parents couldn't understand why the mother would do such a thing. Raina's stepfather even followed Victor around a few times, but found nothing unusual or incriminating. The young man did not drink alcohol, did not use illegal substances, and was either at home or at work repairing motorcycles. He was never rude to the children, even when left alone with them. In other words, despite suspicions, he seemed like a normal person. Raina's parents wrote off the restraining order as her birth mother's eccentricity and settled down. The tale ended when the aunt who had been caring for the youngest daughter, Angela, informed Raina that she could no longer care for the girl. Around the same time, Raina's mother began having health problems, and the grandchildren had to move from their grandmother's house to Raina and Victor's. Suddenly, all 5 of them found themselves in a small apartment. However, the circumstances were very favorable. Raina was offered a new job with a higher salary. The reunited family moved into a spacious rented house with several separate rooms. A happy family life began. A spacious house, loving partners, children with their mother. Isn't that a sign that everything was going well? Perhaps it was, but soon Raina lost her job and the family faced some financial difficulties. According to Victor's mother, she even had to provide financial assistance to the young couple, as there was not enough money even for food, not to mention rent. Meanwhile, Raina's mother never heard about the difficulties her daughter was facing. Raina only occasionally brought the children to her mother's house, asking her grandmother to feed them well, which her grandmother was happy to do. In addition to the financial problems, something strange and clearly unhealthy began to happen in the couple. Raina had never complained to anyone about anything, but their relationship was far from normal. Shortly before the terrible events, Victor appeared on the street with short-cropped hair. It turned out that the couple had had a serious fight the night before, and Raina had cut off his long black hair as revenge while he slept. Additionally, Victor admitted that Raina threatened to leave him with the kids if he didn't find a well-paying job within a month. On Saturday, February 3, 2018, Raina went to her mother's house to pick up the children, who had been staying with their grandmother since Thursday. Raina's mother did not notice anything unusual in her daughter's behavior. On the contrary, she was sociable and in a normal mood. They had time to chat over a cup of tea while the children packed their things. The next day, early Sunday morning, February 4th, the girl and her mother had a brief telephone conversation during which they discussed current affairs and agreed to call each other later. Raina never contacted again. After numerous attempts to call and many text messages sent to her daughter and grandchildren, the woman called Victor, but he didn't pick up either. So the silence and ignoring of calls stretched for several days. Finally, on Wednesday, February 7th, Victor answered. He assured that everything was in order and promised that Raina would call back soon and explain everything in detail. He asked her not to worry and to wait for the call. The daughter never called back. It became clear to the parents that something terrible had happened. A day later, they received a call from law enforcement officers, from whom Reina's parents learned the horrifying details of what had happened. After the arrest, Victor Alexander immediately began to testify. He did not hide anything and did not count on leniency. According to him, he really wanted to end his life, but then changed his mind, believing that he should pay for what he had done. Thanks to the detailed testimony, it was possible to almost completely restore the chronology of events. On the morning of Sunday, February 4th, the roommates had another big fight in their shared bedroom. Victor struck Reina several blows on her neck, chest, and stomach, as a result of which she died. He then left her body locked in the room and sent Daniela, Reina's oldest child, to the store, asking her to buy him a pack of cigarettes. While the girl was gone, Victor went to the children's room and strangled Reina's daughter with a necktie while she slept. When Daniela returned from the store, he did the same thing to her as he had done to her sister. He then moved the children's bodies to the bedroom he shared with Reina. At that time, young Aramin was playing quietly in the small courtyard behind the house. Victor approached the boy and explained that his older sister had gone to the store and was too late, so he would take him to his aunt's house and then go look for Daniela. Aramin obediently went with Victor to the house of his aunt, Johanna Mendoza Coelho. Leaving the boy behind, the man returned to the house, intending to hide the consequences of his actions. It seems that it was only when he returned to the house that he realized that it was impossible to hide the truth, and it would inevitably be revealed. A few hours later, he returned for the boy and informed his aunt that Daniela had been found and it was time to go home. At home, Victor ended Aramin's life by hanging him from a rung inside a closet. The man claimed that he committed this crime because of the difficult financial situation they were all in, which he was psychologically unable to cope with. Victor's acquaintances confirmed that he had recently complained about family disagreements over money. Victor's mother told investigators that it was financial difficulties that had driven her son to a state of despair and forced him to commit such a grave act. The couple was already in a critical state, and their situation was exacerbated over the weekend when they did not receive their expected paycheck. I believe that it was this situation of my son, who was still a young man, being demanded money from a woman and her children, that pushed him to the edge, said Mrs. Joanna Mendoza, aunt of the accused. However, the extreme brutality of the crime was not consistent with a state of mental illness. The preliminary autopsy report clarified the situation, showing that all the female victims were not only deprived of their lives, but also abused. An investigation by the public prosecutor's office revealed that the victim, Reina Isabel Encarnacion, had repeatedly expressed concerns in correspondence with the accused on WhatsApp about the inappropriateness of intimate acts towards Angela while she was asleep. In one of the latest messages, the woman threatened her cohabitant that she would go to the police. Reina's mother told the police that the detained young man had always treated the three girls very well, but he had a special relationship with Angela. He carried her in his arms, often put her on his lap, hugged and kissed her. He even came up with a special nickname for her, Señorita. Investigators assumed that Victor had ended the lives of the family members not because of financial problems, but to cover up the wrongful acts committed against Angela. Forensic results confirmed that Reina, as well as the two girls, had been wrongfully abused. However, the experts could not determine whether the wrongful acts were committed before or after taking their lives, as the bodies were found at a late stage of decomposition. A psychiatric examination showed that Victor suffers from antisocial personality disorder, meaning he lacks both guilt and conscience. The heinous crime outraged and shocked the entire Dominican society. The trial began in January 2019 and was completed in just 2 days. Testimony was given by experts and forensic experts, investigators, and various witnesses. Especially a lot of information was obtained from Victor's friends. For example, Crystal, the defendant's best friend, said that on the day of his arrest, he gave her all of his social media passwords and his mother's phone number. According to her, it seemed that the young man was planning to leave his life. Another friend of the young man said that Victor confessed the crime to him in detail a few days before his arrest, but the confession was so horrifying that the friend took it as a joke. In general, everyone who had ever seen or met the accused was shocked by his act. Neighbors, teachers, co-workers, they always saw him as a quiet guy with a distinctive appearance and nothing more. He didn't seem confrontational, wasn't known as a brawler, and, according to them, never spoke ill of others. He just wasn't very social. Victor's only diagnosis as a child was attention deficit disorder, but according to his mother, the condition didn't cause any problems for the family or himself. Some 18 witnesses, including 2 forensic experts, testified at the trial. The latter provided such shocking details that even Victor's mother asked for the full weight of the law to fall on her son. Justice must be served, he must pay for everything he has done, she said in court. She begged Reina's family to forgive her for having such a son and shared their grief. Victor Alexander Putrell pleaded guilty in court to taking the lives of Reina Isabel Encarnacion and her 3 children. He also apologized to the victim's family and the public for the crime. I accept the facts, and not everything that was said happened exactly as described. I realize that I cannot turn back time and bring back the lives I took. I apologize to the community and all family members for what happened. I contributed to my arrest because I realized that by ending my life, I would not be able to pay for my actions, Victor Putrell calmly stated. The man received the most severe sentence then available in the Dominican Republic's judicial system, 30 years. At the time the sentence was pronounced, he was just 30 years old, meaning that under fortunate circumstances, he could leave prison and live the rest of his life in freedom. This possibility seriously urged the National Congress to expedite updates to the criminal code. The country's code, adopted in 1844, does not include cumulative punishment for multiple crimes. Had the updated criminal code, currently under consideration in the National Congress, been in effect, Victor Alexander would have faced a sentence of up to 60 years for his crime. The life-taking of Reina and her children drew attention to the urgency of replacing the code as soon as possible. Nevertheless, it can be said that justice prevailed. The perpetrator received the maximum sentence. At least Reina's mother, speaking on various television programs, stated that she was satisfied with the outcome of the case. The biological father of the 3 children who were taken cannot yet accept what happened. He stated that the tragedy with his children would not have occurred if the judge had listened to the experts and granted him custody. The case of Nobuyuki Sato, a schoolgirl in the house as a pet. To realize that the perpetrator is a maniac is possible by the nature of his actions. As a rule, maniacs abuse, torture, and then brutally take the lives of their victims, but sometimes such abuse lasts for years or even decades. If the account of a maniac has more than 2 victims, criminalists call it a series, and the criminal himself, a serial maniac. The history of world criminalistics knows a lot of cases when maniacs did not kill their victims, but held them captive in their own homes, basements, or specially created bunkers. It is enough to remember Natasha Kampusch or Elizabeth Fritzl, who was kept by her own father in the basement of their own house for 24 years. Alas, there are many such stories, and what is most curious is that in most cases the hostages were, one might say, in full view of everyone, and the kidnappers had previously come to the attention of the police. The name of our heroine today is Fusako Sano, and she has been held captive for almost 10 years in a room whose door was never locked. One might assume that it was her story that inspired Natasha Kampusch's kidnapper, but by the time the Japanese girl's tragedy became public, the Austrian schoolgirl Natasha had already been living in captivity for a 2nd year. But let's break down this tangled case full of drama known as the Niigata girl captivity incident from the start. Victim, Fusako Sano. A girl named Fusako Sano, later changed her name to Sachiko Yamada, was born in the small Japanese town of Mitsuke, located in Niigata Prefecture in 1980, on November 28th. She grew up in an ordinary family of average income, was a welcome and favorite child. The girl attended one of the local schools, was fond of baseball, and cheered for the local team. On November 13th, 1990, 2 weeks before her 10th birthday, Fusako, who was in the 4th grade at the time, was coming home from school. She was a little late because she had stayed to watch the school baseball game. Her parents were aware of the sporting event, so they were not particularly concerned. When the schoolgirl walked home on her usual route, it was already getting dark. On a cold autumn evening, there were almost no passers-by on the street, and rare cars were passing quickly, disappearing from sight. Suddenly, one car overtook the girl and then braked sharply and swerved in front of her. The loud squeal of brakes divided young Sano's life into before and after. Kidnapper Nobuyuki Sato. Nobuyuki Sato was born in 1962, July 15th, in the Japanese prefecture of Niigata in a wealthy family. The head of the family had its own successful business related to passenger transportation. The boy was a late child of his parents, and at the time of his birth, his father was 62 years old, and his mother was 37 years old. Nobuyuki had 5 siblings from his father's previous marriage, but he had no ties to them. The boy grew up a capricious and very spoiled child, for whom there were no inhibitions. At the same time, he was very emotional and sometimes even aggressive. If his demands were not met immediately, he could throw a tantrum, and once he threw himself at his mother with fists right in the store when she did not buy him another toy. At school, Nobuyuki had almost no friends because of his complex character, strange and sometimes inadequate behavior. It is worth noting that the boy was quite tall, which he was very embarrassed of, and all the time slouched a lot, so he received a lot of offensive nicknames. On one of the central streets of the city, the head of the family built a luxurious 2-story house in European style, where on the second floor most of the part was occupied by a spacious and bright children's room for his favorite son. However, the boy did not like the room. He behaved restlessly and kept repeating that he was afraid to be there alone. Such anxious behavior and unreasonable fears became the reason to show the child to a doctor. After an initial medical examination at a regular hospital, the boy was referred to a psychiatrist for evaluation. There he was diagnosed with several disorders, including nyctophobia, fear of the dark, misophonia, fear of germs and dirt. In addition, the boy was found to have a strange combination of autophobia, fear of loneliness, and sociophobia, anxiety disorder related to social interaction. That is, he was equally afraid of and avoided both loneliness and contact with others. Nobuyuki always remained a loner. He had neither a girlfriend, despite his rather attractive appearance, nor friends. In high school, he actually became an outcast, and peers simply did not want to communicate with him. He could vent his anger, dissatisfaction with himself and others only on his own elderly parents, who forgave him everything and tried in every possible way to placate his son with gifts or money. As an adult, Sato did not stay at any job. He constantly got into trouble, conflicted with colleagues, and neglected his direct duties, because of which no one wanted to do business with him. The young man could go home in the middle of the workday just because it rained, and he felt sad about it. And once he intentionally injured a female coworker. He probably felt some kind of sympathy for her and was trying to get her attention. The incident was written off as an accident, but Sato was immediately fired. After that, he did not work anywhere else and lived on his parents' money. Gradually, the young man began to leave his room less and less often, and more often conflicts with his parents. After another such quarrel, the young man set a fire in his own home, which almost destroyed the entire house and its inhabitants. Then Sato was sent for compulsory treatment in the psychiatric clinic, where he was diagnosed with manic depressive disorder, outbursts of uncontrolled aggression, as well as signs of misogyny, acute dislike and hatred of female representatives of the female sex. He stayed in the hospital for a little over a month, after which he was discharged, having been deemed to pose no threat to others. For a while, Nobuyuki was relatively calm, and even started to rebuild the partially burned house and added a couple more rooms to it. But his efforts did not last long, and he simply abandoned the construction. The first attempted kidnapping and arrest. Sato became increasingly unsociable, sullen, and spent most of his time in his room watching TV. It should be noted that over time he stopped letting his mother and father not only into his room, but also, in principle, to the second floor. In case of violation of this boundary, he would pounce on his elderly parents with fists, shouting and threatening them with death. In the spring of 1989, Nobuyuki began to go for walks, but he preferred to walk near one of the local schools, where he closely watched the girls. At first he behaved with restraint, did not approach, and did not try to make contact with anyone. But one day he grabbed one of the girls right at the school gate, threw her over his shoulder, and ran to his car, which he parked nearby. All this happened in front of the other children, who immediately shouted and called for help. A school security guard and a few bystanders reacted quickly and rescued the girl and detained the kidnapper before the police arrived. The girl Sato tried to kidnap was barely 9 years old. He could not explain why he had attacked the schoolgirl, so the only logical conclusion was that Sato was charged with attempting to commit unlawful acts of violence against a minor. He faced a serious prison sentence, but at his trial, which took place in August of the same year, Nobuyuki was given only a year's probation. According to some reports, his father helped him to do this by using his connections and paying a lot of money. Moreover, soon Nobuyuki's name mysteriously disappeared from the database of criminals who were prosecuted. Here, apparently, also did not do without the efforts of his father, except that the elderly man, so zealously trying to clean up the reputation of the heir, himself went to the hospital with a heart attack and died. Sato Sr. felt an acute sense of shame and pain for the monster he had raised. The kidnapping of a girl in Niigata.
A year and a half after the first failed kidnapping attempt, the 28-year-old went on the hunt again. All this time, he behaved relatively calmly, did not get in the sight of the police, and the incident that occurred in the spring of 1989 near the school, safely all forgotten. On November 13th, 1990, Nobuyuki left home, got into a car, and for several hours just drove around the city. In the evening, when it was starting to get dark, he drove to a deserted road, where he soon saw a girl coming home from school. It was 9-year-old Fusako Sano, who had, to her misfortune, been delayed at a sporting event that day. There were no people or other cars nearby, no one to call for help or police. Sato braked sharply and swerved to the curb right in front of the girl. He got out of the car, knife in hand, grabbed Fusako and threatened if she tried to scream or run away, he would slit her throat. He then shoved Fusako Sano into the trunk, and after driving down the road some more, he turned onto a vacant lot. There, Nobuyuki opened the trunk again, tied the girl's hands and feet, and taped her mouth shut. When it got dark, the kidnapper drove to his house, took the captive out of the trunk, and carried her to his room, entering through an unfinished part of the dwelling to remain undetected. Then he also went back out, and entered already through the door, as he always did. Nobuyuki went upstairs, and again threatening her with the knife, ordered Fusako to be quiet. He then tied her to the bed and told her that if she tried to leave the room or even look out the window, scream or cry, he would kill her and throw her body into the ocean so that no one would ever find it. The schoolgirl was scared to death and did everything the kidnapper said, still hoping that he would take pity and let her go. The search for the missing girl. When Fusako didn't come home from school, her parents began to worry. They knew her daughter would stay late after school to watch a baseball game, but it was getting dark outside, and she should have been home a long time ago. At first, the Sano couple tried to find their daughter on their own, following her usual route from home to school, but their efforts were unsuccessful. Closer to night, the parents of the schoolgirl appealed to the police, hoping that the girl will be found quickly, because from the moment of her disappearance has passed only a few hours. Police squads began the search, and by morning they were joined by dozens of volunteers from among local residents. The next day, more than 200 people took part in the search operation, combing the area, pasting flyers with photos of the missing girl and interviewing passers-by in search of random witnesses. Notably, Nobuyuki lived very close to the girl's school and near the police station. Moreover, he had previously come to the attention of the police for attempting to kidnap the girl. But despite all this, Nobuyuki was not even a suspect in the case, thanks to the efforts of his late father, who made sure that his son's name did not appear in the criminal database. The massive search lasted for many months, checking numerous empty buildings, structures, trailers, and railroad cars, searching suspicious vehicles, combing vacant lots and interstate highways. But despite all the efforts, no traces or clues to the schoolgirl's whereabouts were found. The most different, even unlikely versions were being worked out, among which there was a suggestion that representatives of North Korean special services were involved in the abduction of the Japanese girl. However, as time went on, the search was not successful, and Fusako Sano was still considered missing, captured by a maniac. As Fusako herself later admitted, she was scared to death at first and did everything her captor told her, hoping that in time he would take pity on her and let her go. But Nobuyuki didn't even think of letting his captive go. For the first few months, he bound her hands and feet tightly, so tightly that the blood flow was impaired, causing her to lose some sensation in her limbs. In case of the slightest disobedience or violation of silence, the torturer used a stun gun as punishment, beat Fusako on the head and body with his fists, or threatened her with a knife. At the same time, Nobuyuki never once took advantage of his victim in an intimate way during his imprisonment.
He was not attracted to her as a woman, but rather something between a living toy and a pet to talk to. Nobuyuki Sato fed the prisoner once or twice a day with food prepared by his mother, who lived on the first floor. Because of this meager diet, the girl was weakened and severely malnourished. He forbade her to get out of bed, and she had to go to the bathroom in plastic bags, which the man then took to the unfinished part of the house. Once a month, he bathed Fusako in a basin, cut her hair and nails himself, and dressed her in his own shabby clothes. But even if she behaved quietly and did not break the kidnapper's rules, he still beat her regularly for fun and practiced various fighting techniques on her. After a few years, Fusako was finally broken psychologically, complied with all the demands of her tormentor, and did not even try to run or look out the window. Sato stopped tying her up when he went somewhere else and didn't even lock the door of his room. He simply made the bed with the prisoner lying there and threw a couple of blankets or towels on top, so that at first glance it looked like there was nothing underneath. As time went on, Nobuyuki began to turn on Fusako's radio periodically and allowed her to watch television with him. However, they watched only scotchki or some sports matches, something that was interesting to Nobuyuki himself. He also brought her comic books, which he adored. It was the only thing Fusako had read in her years of confinement. For almost 10 years, she had seen no other people but her captor, had never spoken to anyone, and had never left the confines of her room. In fact, she was on the bed all the time, and hardly moved at all. The girl was so resigned to her fate that she did not even try to resist, escape, or make herself known. Mother abuse and police indifference. Nobuyuki's mother lived on the first floor of the house and for years had not entered her son's room because he threatened to beat her if she broke the ban. The woman knew her spoiled and violent son all too well, so she followed his rules. After Nobuyuki put a prisoner in the room, he forbade the mother to even go up to the second floor, and when she once tried to do so, he simply pushed the elderly mother down the stairs. She worked as much as she could and tried to stay home as little as possible. But when she retired in 1996, at the age of 73, her life became simply unbearable. Her son regularly abused his mother, beat her, and forced her to follow a series of rules he had invented. Finally, the elderly woman could not stand it, and in the spring of 1996 went to the police, where she wrote a statement that she was a victim of domestic violence by her own son. But the police, apparently, did not want to deal with the case, and therefore persuaded Mrs. Sato to withdraw her statement and independently deal with the family problems. The pensioner also twice applied for consultation to the public health center, where she complained about her son's inadequate and aggressive behavior and asked to hospitalize him in a psychiatric hospital. But even here she was refused, considering such a reason not serious enough and advising her to persuade her son to go to the clinic for help himself. Almost 4 years later, in January 2000, the exhausted elderly woman, after another beating, called the hospital and asked for a medical team to be sent to her house, as well as representatives of law enforcement, because her son was holding her tied up and had tasered her several times. An unexpected discovery. This time, the officials finally responded to the pensioner's complaints and went to the address. When the ambulance and police car arrived at the house, Nobuyuki became visibly nervous. He began to behave aggressively, resisted, and tried to fight. Because of this inappropriate behavior, He had to be handcuffed, and the medics injected him with a large dose of sedatives. The beaten elderly woman admitted that she was afraid of her son, whose behavior was becoming more and more aggressive and uncontrollable. She also said that she had not gone up to the second floor of the house for many years because the air forbade her to do so, threatening to kill her. The police officers decided to check the second floor and Nobuyuki's room. As soon as they entered, they noticed a pile of blankets lying on the bed, which suddenly moved slightly. Pulling back the blankets, the police officers were dumbfounded to see a very thin, pale, and exhausted girl underneath them. When they asked her who she was and how she came to be here, she very quietly gave her name and said that she had been kidnapped on her way home from school a long time ago. After the gruesome discovery, Nobuyuki's mother was brought into the room and asked her if she knew the girl, but the woman was very surprised and claimed that she had no idea that anyone other than her and her son lived in their house. The captive also confirmed that she had never seen the woman before. Confessions of a maniac. The same day Nobuyuki was brought to the station for questioning, and what he told literally shocked the police officers. He remembered in detail the day he was driving along the road and saw Fusako. According to the detainee, he thought the girl was very cute and wanted to take her home with him. Sato claimed that he took care of her. He fed her, washed her, dressed her, and read her comic books, and punished her only for disobedience. He also admitted that he loved his captive as a friend, and she seemed to love him too. He had no intention of ever letting her go, and hoped she would stay with him for life. He loved spending time with her. He could talk to the girl for hours about skaks, soccer, music, or his favorite comic book characters, and she would listen silently. He added that he never locked his bedroom door, but Fusako never tried to escape, which he concluded meant she liked living with him. Consequences, trial, and sentence. After a medical examination, the doctors concluded that, despite his mental disorder, Sato was able to recognize his actions and could therefore stand trial. His mother could be involved as an accomplice because the elderly woman, at the request of her son, regularly bought feminine hygiene products in the supermarket and could suspect something wrong. But it was taken into account the fact that she repeatedly contacted the police and medical institutions, but her requests to visit the family home were ignored. The case was widely publicized even before the trial began, and the city police were strongly criticized because Nobuyuki had been previously prosecuted for attempted kidnapping of a schoolgirl, but when he brought his plan to the end, he remained above suspicion. As a result, the local police chief and the head of the regional police department, who failed to control the situation from the beginning and made a lot of mistakes, were removed from their posts. Nobuyuki Sato was brought to trial in May 2000. All his actions, and even the smallest offenses, were studied in detail and attached to the case because the prosecutors tried to achieve for the kidnapper of the maximum possible punishment. As a result, Sato was found guilty and sentenced to 14 years in prison. Such a term was considered the maximum. He was released in the spring of 2015. By that time, his mother had long died in a home for the elderly, and Nobuyuki had no other relatives. He himself was found dead a year and a half later in early 2017 in a small rented room. The cause of his death was not disclosed. How did the girl's life turn out? At the time of her discovery, Fusako was so weak that she could barely stand on her feet. Doctors diagnosed her with exhaustion and dehydration, and her muscles were practically atrophied, in addition to stuttering, frightened of sunlight, and practically lost her communication skills. When her parents saw their daughter for the first time after nearly a decade apart, they didn't even recognize her. It took the girl about a year to more or less recover physically, but her mental health took much longer to recover. Fusako Sano had severe post-traumatic stress disorder, shunned people, and her intelligence remained at the level of a 10-year-old child. Her parents took their daughter out of town. She changed her name to Sachiko Yamada and flatly refused to talk to the press. Over time, she made friends, took up photography, and even passed her driver's license test. Unfortunately, in 2007, she suffered another shock when her father drowned in front of her eyes during a family trip to a pond.